All right, everybody, I think that's enough for us to get started tonight. We are in John chapter 4. John chapter 4. All right. When therefore the Lord knew how the Pharisees heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, ... There's more to finish that sentence. Chapter 4, verse 1 sort of just picks up around where the end of chapter 3 left off, go figure, but without any kind of a particular way that it doesn't feel like it's just starting a new thought. It's just carrying on. So there was a very arbitrary cut right there between chapters 3 and 4 by the translators. But we had at the end of chapter 3 a bit of a discussion that came to John the Baptizer. Some people, it just said the Jews. It didn't say what kind of Jews, if they were Pharisees, Sadducees, whatever, scribes, Levites, whatever. It just said the Jews. But we'll see, basically here implies they were the Pharisees. They came to John and to his disciples, and they tried to stir up some trouble. They tried to drive a wedge between Jesus and John by saying, look, John, you've got this guy over here that you introduced us all to, and now he's getting more disciples than you have, and he's baptizing more people than you are, and trying to gin up John's jealousy, which John, of course, doesn't take that bait. So now we open chapter 4. When the Lord heard this was going on, and that the Pharisees were making a big deal about it. So notice how it's phrased again. The Lord knew how the Pharisees heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John. It wasn't just that once Jesus realized, I'm baptizing more people than John, though he's personally not doing it. We'll get that in the next verse. It wasn't just that he realized, like someone handed him a stat sheet or something like that. That's not what it was. And it wasn't that he started to perceive that John was envious or jealous or something like that. That's not what it was. It was just that he saw the way the Pharisees were going to be using that against him. Then he decides, as we'll see, he needs to get out of town for a while and go to the other parts of his ministry region. Verse 2, little parenthetical, to clarify, Jesus himself did not baptize anybody. His disciples baptized. At this point here, at the early days of Jesus' ministry, what he is saying and doing and what John is saying and doing are basically the exact same, with one huge difference being Jesus performing miracles. John, as far as we know, never did that, other than to demonstrate some divine insight given to him by God as a prophet. But actual working of miracles, we don't have any record of John doing that. But what you have basically is John and Jesus both preaching the same message: repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand, be baptized, and embrace the coming Messiah. Jesus is the coming Messiah, so I'm sure the way it's phrased and words and what he says in the speeches he gives are slightly different than John's, but the content is ultimately the same. Repent and be baptized, get ready for the Messiah, because the kingdom of the Messiah is at hand. So same message, same action in response to that message, which is baptizing people. So you got John, who clearly baptized people individually. He personally baptized Jesus, and the text repeatedly says people came to John to be baptized of him. Whether or not John's disciples did baptizing, we don't know. What we do know is Jesus himself never personally put anyone in the water. Jesus himself, after preaching repent and be baptized, and people came repenting to be baptized, Jesus never personally dipped them in the water. The text doesn't elaborate on why, probably because it's one of those self-explanatory things. The most obvious answer is usually the correct one here. You have even the Apostle Paul, who was not Jesus, not on the level of the Messiah, Christ King, but still an apostle and still a very influential figure in the church many decades from here. He will say in 1 Corinthians 1, I'm glad that I didn't baptize any of you people, you divisive people, lest you would use that against each other in your divisive ways. Paul did baptize people, but he didn't make it a point to personally do all the baptizing. And there were times when he says, I'm glad that I didn't, because you would have found a way to prop that up as a way to make yourself look better. Just imagine if someone came along and said, you were just baptized by Peter? Well, I was baptized by Jesus himself. I'm therefore you're better, and so forth. So Jesus just stayed out of that, because ultimately that part of it doesn't matter. It's not about the person doing the immersing. It's about the person being immersed. It's about the person doing the submitting, not the one who is you're a glorified actor. You're just the one helping the person fulfill the command to be baptized. So it doesn't matter who you are, but that's why Jesus doesn't partake. Verse 3. Because Jesus heard what the Pharisees were doing, blah, 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 he left Judea and departed into Galilee, which makes it sound like he goes from Judea to Galilee. But as we'll see in the whole of this chapter, There's a giant plot of land in between Judea and Galilee, and that is Samaria, where we'll spend the bulk of our time here this evening. So Jesus says it's time to get out of Judea, let John do his thing, until the time comes when he is no longer able to by being arrested by the government. So he leaves Judea and heads north. The typical way a Jew heads to Galilee from Judea is he takes a long road around, a well-traveled, not particularly out of the way. I mean, it's out of the way of Samaria, and to get to Galilee, you're going the long way. But it's not like you're taking some weird back road where there's like overgrown foliage and people ready to jump out and mug you and wildcats ready to pounce. Not like that. It was a well-maintained, deliberately so, easy access road to get you from Judea to Galilee without having even to smell the Samaritans on your way there. It was a long journey. You were taking a long way around. It was not a short cut. It was a long cut. It was a racist cut because they didn't want to have anything to do with those dirty people. So that's their perspective. So they went the long way around in order to get there. Jesus, however, verse 4, my Bible words it like this, and he must needs go through Samaria. In other words, literally, he felt a compulsion. He felt a drive. He felt something that was pulling at him, tugging at him, driving him toward, I must go through Samaria. Samaria is not my goal. Galilee is my goal, but I just feel like I'm supposed to go through Samaria to get there. That intuition, that sense of obligation, that compulsion, that itch that must be scratched, given to him by God through the Holy Spirit, no doubt, and so he reacts to it. The Samaritan, or Samaria, we'll start with the Samaria. Samaria is a region, but it didn't used to be. Samaria, the name used to be applied to a city. It was the city capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. You've got one kingdom under Saul, David, and Solomon, and the kingdom splits because of taxes, go figure. They split, and so the northern kingdom rebels and goes away, and they start putting men on the throne who have no lineage to David, so not approved of God. And then the south remains with God, though, I mean, they're not always, a bunch of, swell people, but they are at least the royal lineage of David continuing in the south. But in the north, they have their own lineage, they have their own kings, they have their own way of doing things, and eventually, not very soon after that, they decide, hey, we need to stop sending our people down to Jerusalem to worship, so we'll establish our own worship places in Dan and Bethel, and we'll make them go either there or there, depending on which is closer. They can worship there, and so we'll have nothing to do with the southern kingdom, and the southern will have nothing to do with the northern kingdom, and they will become essentially two completely independent political bodies. Then along comes Assyria and just spanks the northern kingdom, threatens the south, but God intervenes. We already studied that a couple years ago if you were in the class on Isaiah. God intervened and saved the south, but the north was wiped out. The north's punishment for all of their sins and idolatries was essentially Assyria. Assyria was the paddle with which God spanked Assyria. No, with which God spanked Samaria. Sorry, that's the one he used to spank the northern kingdom. So after they were defeated, most of them were killed, many of them were carried off, and the Assyrians injected foreign elements into the land, brought in outsiders, foreigners, to kind of take over the land. This is a very common thing in political takeovers of nations. It never happened, but it has been studied and documented based on Hitler's plans, what Hitler planned on doing if he had defeated England, if he had defeated America, how he would have carved out a lot of America for Japan, a lot of America for Germany, and had like a little reservation land for Americans to remain in. But a lot of it would be imported people coming in to kind of run the government and run the country as a vassal state of the motherland, the mother kingdom. Same idea here. They injected those foreign elements into it. How far deep you want to go into that in terms of what the remaining populace, the scattered smatterings of people did with those foreign elements? That's up to you to decipher, but 2 Kings 17:24 kind of summarizes all of that, but that's not the point here. The point here is that's the history of the Samaritan people and the Samaria place. That kingdom name eventually just became known for the whole region there. And as a result of that and what that represented for the Jews when they thought about their history and the shame they had in their history, they slowly came to resent and to hate, when they came back from Babylonian exile, this foreign entity that was in their land or near their land, and this animosity and enmity kind of just swelled and grew over time. That's a quick and dirty summary. I'm sure I left out a lot of details, but there it is basically. Verse 5. So with that all said, you can see why your average prejudicial Jew would want to go the long way around, and thus you can see why Jesus, the upsetter of apple carts that he was, the breaker of molds that he was, feels a compulsion to go right through the heart of it, to engage with them. Verse 5. So then he came to the city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. That's Genesis 48, 21, and 22. Sychar was in fact near Shechem, which is where Joseph's bones were later buried after he was brought out of Egypt post-captivity. That's Joshua 24, 32. In fact, the name Sychar means the place of the sepulcher. So there's a lot of Old Testament history here in this place. And as we'll see, when we finally get to this woman at the well, she starts talking, these Samaritan people are not anti-Moses. They are not anti-Israelite. They're anti-Jew, but they're not anti-Hebrew. As we'll see, the Samaritan people, they hold to the Pentateuch. They believed the Pentateuch. They didn't believe the other 34 books, but those first 5 books of Moses, they held as sacred scripture. And they lived by them as closely and devoutly as they could. In fact, in a lot of ways, more devoutly than the Israelites did. But we'll get there. So, that's the area in which Jesus is entering, and Jacob's well is there, a few hundred feet from the base of Mount Gerizim, which is their holy mountain, as Mount Zion is to the Jews. This well, it's called in my Bible Jacob's well, probably in your Bible too. There is no Jacob's well in question here in the Old Testament, in Genesis. So the history of it, we don't have. At some point, either Jacob or associate of Jacob, on behalf of Jacob, dug this well, or Jacob stopped there along the way where the well was already, and just his name became associated with it, as happens in history and in culture. But there it is. Jacob's well is there, as it was known in the first century. And Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus at the well, and it was about the 6th hour, high noon. It's hot, he's tired, he's been walking a long ways. I want something to drink. So he sits down at the well. You've got the city right here, just outside the city is the well. So it was common. You see this when you get to, is it Isaac who goes? Yeah, it's Isaac. Goes to the city, and outside the city, the women start coming out. Well, it's not Isaac, it's the man on behalf of Isaac. Right. But anyway, the point is, it was common to have the well outside the city, and the ladies would come out to draw the water to bring back into the city. So that's what's happening here. Here comes this woman of Samaria to draw water. I know, I'm a little scatterbrained. It happens. Life's over here.
Did you have a stroke? Are you having a stroke?
That's not polite to people who have stroke. Verse 7, as is custom, there comes a woman of Samaria out to draw water, and Jesus says to her, "Give me to drink." There is nothing unusual about this request, except for the fact that it's a Jew talking to a Samaritan, as she herself will point out in just a second. But if it strikes you as odd, you have this random man and this random woman who've never interacted before, and suddenly this man is just barking orders at this woman, I would just remind you, time and place, culture and tradition. Theirs much different than ours. In this culture, in this era, in this time and place, a woman was a subservient member of the society. So it was perfectly normal for a man to speak to a random woman and just tell her to do something for him, and it was perfectly normal for her not to be offended by that. Oh, for the days. And just to serve. It's good and godly, I'm just saying, but let's move on. Jesus says to her, "Give me to drink." Now, he is thirsty, but as we'll see at the end of this whole conversation, he's okay. I mean, he's not dying of thirst here. In fact, he even says, "I'm not even that hungry for physical food." Oh, this will be at the end of this whole conversation. He says, "I feel satisfied already. I feel completely filled based on what has just happened," which we're about to experience. So we're at the front end of that, and Jesus says, "Give me water," but it's not like he really, really, really needs a drink. He is initiating conversation, starting a dialogue that is going to go so much deeper than just H2O. "Give me a drink," he says. A little parenthetical here. Jesus' disciples were gone away into the city to buy meat. And that's all John says about that, and then we move on. We'll meet them again later when they're coming out of the city, and they're just shocked that he's having this conversation with the Samaritan dog woman. That's how they would have viewed it. That's how they would have thought about it. But I am just fascinated by this part that is just blown right over to the point where it's just a parenthetical in your Bible, because as we have seen, as we will see again and hear again, the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. If they can help it, they want nothing to do with them, don't even want to look at them, don't want to talk to them. If they have to, they will engage with them. It's not like they're a leper. You won't become unclean if you touch one or talk to one. But culturally, they don't want anything to do with these people. So I would have loved it, Holy Spirit, if you had told John the writer here to give me some details about what happened as Jesus says to the disciples, oh no, we're not taking that road, we're taking this road. And then to hear that conversation. And then as they come into the city, for Jesus to say, oh no, we're not going to go through, we're stopping. That's the first time the parent says we are stopping instead of we're not stopping. No, we're stopping here at this gas station, and you're going to go in and buy a sandwich from these people. Because I am certain if they didn't say, they were at least thinking, I don't want to buy a sandwich from these dirty Samaritans. I don't want to eat their food. I don't want to touch their sandwich bags and have their dirty, grubby hands hand me the receipt with the germs all over. I don't want Samaritan on me. I don't want Samaritan in me, in my belly either. But that conversation is not there. And yet later, at the end of Jesus' ministry, we're still at the beginning, but at the end of it, another occasion he's going through Samaria. And the Samaritans then say, those Samaritans say, we don't want you here, go away, go around. And James and John say, can we nuke them from orbit, Lord? Can we have fire rain down from heaven and destroy them? So you see, at least, and that's after 3 years of being with Jesus, they're still ready to nuke them from orbit. It's the only way to be sure, the city of Samaria. So there's no telling how racist they were at the beginning of his ministry, and yet that's all just left out. We don't get that, but I wish it was there. Anyway, his disciples aren't there, Jesus is all alone, and so Jesus does his Jesus thing. He engages in dialogue with these people. This woman in particular. So, give me something to drink, he says to her. Verse 9. Then says the woman of Samaria to him, how is it that you, being a Jew, would ask a drink of me, a woman of Samaria? Just asking a drink of a woman, not the issue. A Jew to a Samaritan, that's the issue. The Jews, as you no doubt know, have no dealings with the Samaritans. The Samaritans were monotheistic people. I'm saying this to kind of highlight how silly it is. It's a fact, but it's a silly thing that the Jews have nothing to do with the Samaritans, considering how much they have in common with them, as common ground that they could develop a good spiritual dialogue with them, as Jesus does here, the exception not the rule. The Samaritans were monotheists. Find me another religion in this area that is also that other than the Jews. Believed the words of Moses. They didn't believe the rest of it. After Deuteronomy, it's off the cliff. But the first 5 books, they're right there with them. They didn't worship at Mount Zion, but they worshiped at Mount Gerizim, and they tried as much as they could to do a lot of the same stuff you find in Exodus and Leviticus. It's just on this mountain and not that mountain, which I would point out, there's no Mount Zion in Exodus and Leviticus anyway, but that's clearly where God wants them to be, as Jesus himself will say in a little bit. But in terms of what they do, they tried to mimic it as best as they could. Even today, there are Samaritan people. There's only like 500 of them left who still hold the so-called Samaritan religion, but they still go up to Mount Gerizim every Passover, because that's Exodus, that's their Bible. They go up to Mount Gerizim, where they used to have a temple that is now destroyed, and on the remnants of that temple, they celebrate the Passover, because in their cultural history is the same Exodus account that the Israelites adhere to. That's the Samaritans of today. Here are these people. I want to just plant that in your mind, not just to point out how strange and silly and ridiculous it is. These hard-hearted Jews had no dealings with them, despite the commonalities that they shared, but also later when Jesus starts talking about spirit and truth. Just planting that seed there. She just responds with surprise. You don't have any business with us, so what are you talking to me for? Verse 10. Jesus said to her, if you knew the gift of God, that's statement 1, and 2, if you knew who said to you, give me a drink, then you would have asked a drink out of him. You would have asked him to give you a drink. And he would have given you, he's speaking of himself in the third person, he would have given you living water. So give me something to drink. I thirst, I parch, I need water. Give me a drink. Why would I ever help you? Why would you ever want to even converse with me to be helped by you when we don't have anything to do with each other? And you are talking, is his response, to the one person who has something to do with everybody. Because I am God in the flesh. He doesn't say that yet. He'll get there. But he basically says, if you knew who you were talking to, then you'd be asking me for something to drink. And I wouldn't just give you water. I wouldn't just give you well water. I would give you a water that would make you live forever. Living water. I would give you Eden in liquid form. I would give you what God gave us in the beginning that was lost in sin. Do you see the picture he's painting? In the beginning, God made man and placed him in the Garden of Eden. And he said, here is a tree from which you can eat and live. It is the living tree. We call it the tree of life, but that's just the other way of saying it. The living tree. So eat this and live forevermore. Instead they sinned. And as a result of that, later on, God has to say, you can't stay here, or you'll live forevermore in rebellion. And that's not how I want you to be. So what does God want? If God doesn't want me to live forevermore in rebellion, does he want me just to live and die in and out of rebellion? No. The ultimate goal of God, post-Eden, is for man to live forevermore with God without sin. You follow? You sin. You can't live with God forever with sin. So what are you going to do, God? God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. John 3, previous chapter. I'm going to take away your sin so that you can live forevermore. And I'm going to do all that in one fell swoop. You come to me, and I will give you not a tree that makes you live, but water that makes you live. Why not a tree? Because it's just a different figure of speech, just a different metaphor to the same end. Verse 11. The woman says, Sir, you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Verse 10 again. Do you see the word well anywhere in Jesus' offer? Does he say well water? I have a special kind of well with a special kind of water. Does he call it a well of life? No, he calls it water of life. He didn't say it's coming out of a well. We'll see where it's coming from in a second, but it's not a well. She presumes that. Sir, there's nothing here to draw with, and the well is very deep. So where are you getting this living water? And then she continues, verse 12. Are you greater than our father Jacob? Yeah, I'm the one who named him Israel. But he doesn't say that. Yeah, I am. Who gave us this well and drank there himself. Again, there's no Genesis for this, but we'll take her word for it. Although, maybe we shouldn't, because there's a lot of things about the Samaritans that they just made up. I know I mentioned all the stuff they have in common with the Jews, but for example, just a little sidebar here, they said Mount Gerizim is where God, the dirt from the top of Mount Gerizim is the dirt from which God made Adam. They said that Noah's Ark settled on Mount Gerizim, and it was Ararat, the mountains of Ararat, but they just called it that later. They say all kinds of things about it, so it would not shock me if this was just some hole that they found and they said, oh, that's Jacob's well, to make themselves more important. That's not out of the ballpark, but still. Let's presume it is. Are you greater than our father Jacob, which gave us this well, and drank there himself and his children and his cattle? Are you greater than him to offer something that you say, that you imply, is better than this? Jesus answered and said to her, all right, here's his answer. Are you greater than Jacob? That's what this answer is. Are you greater than Jacob? Whoever drinks of this water, Jacob's water, whoever drinks of that water will have to come back for more later. You'll thirst again. I don't know how thirsty you are. I don't care how cool the water is, how sweet it tastes, how perfect it is on your parched, dry tongue, and you feel completely satisfied. 6 hours and a bag of Doritos later, you'll be right back here needing more. That's just the nature of water. Verse 14. But whoever drinks the water that I give never has to come back for more. Well, no, that's not what he says. That's me paraphrasing. What he says is we'll never thirst again. You will come back for more repeatedly, regularly, but it will never run out. And you will never yourself become parched. It will be like the tree of Eden was meant to be, had sin not interjected and ruined the whole affair. It would be this fruit you pluck from, and the fruit grows right back. We see that picture in Revelation. And you just eat from it and you enjoy. You eat from it and enjoy. And you never get full and you never get hungry. You just perpetually eat and perpetually live. Here is water to which you perpetually go. And you drink and you're perpetually full. You're never too full. You're never thirsty. You just drink and you shall never thirst. So yeah, what I offer is greater than Jacob, because yeah, I am too. The water that I give, the one who comes, shall be in him a well of water springing up. We might say a wellspring. So you've got wells, which is you dig a hole deep enough till you hit a water source, and then you pump it, and you get water out of the well. Then there are springs. A well, just a well itself, you have to have something to, go down into the little pulley system. That's what this is. To go down into the water and then pull it back up again. You have your bucket. And however much you get is dependent on how big the bucket is, how strong your arms are to operate the pulley system, right? Or the rope or whatever it is you're using. You've seen Lawrence of Arabia, the opening scene. That's what the idea is, right? But a wellspring, a fountain, you just go and the water is just bubbling over. The water is just pouring out. The water is just exploding all around you. And you can just immediately take and have and come back for more. And that's what Jesus says here. So it's not a well. It's a wellspring. As he says again, verse 4, whoever drinks of the water that I give him shall never thirst, but the water that I give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. Verse 15. The woman says to him, Sir, give me this water so that I never thirst. I mean, those are your words, and we're repeating them back. Give me this water so that I will never thirst and never have to come back here to draw water again. Clearly, she has failed to see the metaphor, right? But can't hold that against her. Literally nobody is getting Jesus' metaphors at this point in his ministry. So that's not a huge deal. But I wonder if we just assume, don't go away, Matt, just go away. I wonder if we assume, I don't even know him, I'm just kidding. I wonder if we just assume that, I wonder if we just assume that she's just this ignorant person who just only thinks literally, only thinking about waters, only thinking about this. I wonder if it's not the case. That she is thinking on some kind of a philosophical level here. Maybe not all the way, certainly she doesn't get the whole picture. But I wonder if she's thinking something about everlasting life, because that's what she says here. She repeats Jesus' words, that I never have to thirst again, so that I can always be satisfied, so that I can always be content. There is something philosophical there. I don't want to water it down to be just this person who is just this ignoramus who takes everything super literally and hears him say, I have water, you never have to drink again. Well, where you have a spring somewhere, you have a well somewhere, so that I don't have to draw water anymore. I think there's maybe just a little bit deeper she understands, without getting all of it, that she gets at some fundamental level, Jesus is talking about everlasting life. But she doesn't understand the particulars of it. Either way, water in and of itself is not what the Lord is offering. So, having spoken all that and asked for more information, as Jesus frequently does, he doesn't answer the question. He walks around the question to probe deeper into this person so they can have a deeper relationship coming out of it. So his response to, where are you getting this water, is to say, go call your husband and then I'll tell you. Odd response, but the Lord, as always, is like 7 steps ahead of everybody he talks to. So let's see what happens. She says, I don't have a husband. I don't know how she said it. I don't know what her eyes were doing when she said it. I don't know if she was shifting in her stance. Or maybe she's playing it completely cool. Maybe she just thinks, well, this guy just assumes I'm a lady, I have a husband. No. I don't have a husband. And Jesus says, I know. How do you know? I know you don't have a husband. Continue verse 18. You have had 5 husbands, and the man that you're with now is not your husband. So you said truly, I don't have a husband. There are 2 statements Jesus makes here. He didn't have to make one of them. He didn't have to make the first one. If he doesn't say you've had 5 husbands, everything he says is still true and still mind-blowing. So if he just, let's leave that up for a second. She says, I don't have a husband. He says, I know you don't have a husband because the man you're with is not your husband. True statement, just as mind-blowing. It shows that this guy knows who I am. But he also says, you have had 5 husbands. You just keep having them. And the guy you're with is not your husband. Yet, maybe is the implication. I don't know. But the man you're with is not your husband. So he doesn't just know who you are. This guy knows who she has been. He's been around, he's seen. It's not the exact same, but it's very similar to the mind-blowing thing he did with Nathanael at the end of John chapter 1. I saw you under the fig tree. And when I saw you there, I knew who you were. I was there with you. And his mind is blown. So, similar thing here. I know who you were, what you've done. I know who you are, what you're doing. So you said, truly, you don't have a husband. The woman says, enough about me. Let's talk about you. I perceive you're a prophet. Let's immediately change the subject as fast as possible. That's just what I read into that. The woman says to him, Sir, I perceive you're a prophet. You think he's much more than that, but certainly he knows things that no ordinary man should be able to know. I perceive you are a man inspired of God. Again, she's got her Pentateuch. She knows what prophets are, and she knows what Moses in the Pentateuch, in Deuteronomy 18, has prophesied that there will come a prophet like unto Moses. And if you're someone who only has the Pentateuch and you don't have Joshua through Malachi with a bunch of other prophets along the way, you don't even have to deal with the confusion that might come up from all of that. Which prophet are we talking about? You just got Moses at the end of your Bible, basically, saying, and then there'll come another prophet. So from the standpoint of the Samaritans, they have finished their Bible with Deuteronomy, and now they're just waiting for the next Moses to come. They don't have all that, and I don't mean to imply it's a negative thing, but from their perspective, it's baggage. It's not baggage, it's inspired doctrine, it's inspired word from Joshua to Malachi, But from the Samaritans' perspective, they don't have to deal with all that. They've got Moses, and then there's the next Moses. So they're waiting on this next Moses to come. And now here she's talking to Jesus, and she wonders, is he that prophet? I perceive you are a prophet. But keep going and listen how the conversation goes on. Verse 20. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, she means Gerizim. And you say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Well, he never said that. But I'll bet you if he asked him, he would have said that. Jesus would have said that. See, he came back. He wasn't it. You say, don't put words in his mouth, but she's probably right. He is a faithful, loyal Israelite. He would have said, go to Mount Zion for your worship. He'll imply that basically in just a minute. But you can see what she's doing. Taking the heat off herself, taking the conversation about her away to make it about him. So let's not talk about me and my 6 men that I've been with recently. Let's talk about you. You might be a prophet. You people say you've got to worship in this mountain where we say we worship in that mountain. Verse 21, Jesus says, woman, listen to me. I'm speaking the truth here. Believe me. The hour is coming when you will neither worship in this mountain, Gerizim, nor at Jerusalem to worship the Father. I'll bet she's never heard that before. And I'll guarantee you, I'll bet no one's ever heard that before. I don't bet those words have ever been uttered by anybody before. Because even in the prophecies about Jesus and the prophecies about Jesus' coming kingdom and Jesus' coming new covenant like Jeremiah 31, even he and them, those old prophets, and Joel too, even they talk about Mount Zion and Isaiah 2, and how out of the mountain of God, let's go up to Mount Zion, out of Mount Zion will go the law. The Old Testament was written with that Zionistic perspective. So here comes Jesus, and he just explodes that. And he says, let me give you, Samaritan woman, a little bit of the inside scoop that even my own people don't know, because they didn't know how to interpret their own word. The day is coming when it will not be, here comes the Messiah who will bring the Jew and the Samaritan together to worship on Zion. At best, that's what the Jews would have thought. No. The day is coming when the Messiah will come, and he will usher in such a new era that you will not worship God on this mountain or on that mountain. Now, don't misunderstand. You can go to Mount Gerizim and you can worship God. And you can go to Mount Zion and you can worship God. And you can go to Mount Pettygene and you can worship God. You can go anywhere you want and you can worship. You can go to, is this even called a mountain? What do you call this world? What's the name of our congregation? North Heights. Is this a mountain? You can go to Mount North Heights and you can worship God, right? But what Jesus is saying is, the day is coming when there is not a designated place where you must go to here to worship God. The Samaritans are saying, if you want to worship God, you must go up to the temple on Mount Gerizim. That is where you worship God. The Jews say, no, you dirty, nasty people. If you want to worship God, you must go to Mount Zion. You must go up to Mount Moriah. And on the mountain there is the temple. Where there you will worship God. And Jesus says, the day is coming when you will not have to have your map quest open to know how and where to worship God. The day is coming when you will just worship, as he's about to say, in spirit and in truth. Verse 22. Now, lest you take the Lord's words in the previous verse to mean Jesus is throwing the Old Testament under the bus. Lest you take Jesus' words in verse 21 to mean Jesus is washing his hands, proverbially speaking, of the old system of Moses and the law of Moses and all the prophets that were written after Moses. No, lest you think Jesus is trying to distance himself, to use like political jargon of the day. Distance himself from Moses in order to better reach this person. No, Jesus stands on truth, okay? And on truth he says, 22, you Samaritan woman, you worship what you don't know. What you worship is incorrect. How you worship, where you worship, what you do to worship, you don't know what you're doing. You're not doing it right. Jesus just flat out says that, okay? Then he says, we know what we worship. We are the Jews here. For salvation is of the Jews. So he wants to make sure she, and by extension us, don't take this so far to mean that Jesus is anti-Jew and anti-Samaritan. No. He didn't say, right now, this is wrong and that is right. He's saying, in the future to come, all of this is going to be out of the way. All of this is going to be done. Not right or wrong or anything like that. It's just not, it'll be expired. The milk will be expired and it'll be poured out. But right now, the milk is not expired. And right now, this is the milk you drink, and this is the milk you're not supposed to drink. And you, Samaritan woman, are drinking this one, and you're supposed to be drinking this one. But the day is coming 23, the hour is coming. And I know he says, and now is, but what he's saying is, here I am in the present to usher that new era in. Okay? When the true worshipers shall, see, it's still future tense, shall worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Not, we worship the Father in Mount Gerizim. No. We worship the Father in Mount Zion. The day will come when you will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. Now, I know we know that phrase. We've used that phrase 1,000,001 times in a lot of different ways. But I want you to hear it from this perspective. Because I know you've used the phrase in a different way, but you haven't probably associated it with this right here. I'm sorry I won't be there this weekend, but I'll be with you, what is it?
In spirit.
In spirit. What does that mean? Bill?
I'll feel it even though I'm not here.
Yeah. Or you'll feel me even though I'm not here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I won't be there with you, but you'll, yes, David.
Paul uses that phrase when he talks to the Corinthians, and he says, I think he's talking about expelling the brother who's sinning, and he says, well, I can't remember now. Somewhere in 1 Corinthians, he says,
5?
I'm going to be with you in spirit.
Oh, yeah, he does say that. There's no need to read it. What he said is right. You can look it up yourself. 1 Corinthians 5. Takes too much time. Yes, 1 Corinthians 5, Paul used that, which is probably where we got that phrase, where we took it from, as we take in so many Bible phrases and we forget that they came from the Bible. So, take that thought process of what that means is you don't have to be at the actual place to be at the place. What is worship? It is where you approach God and you fall prostrate before Him and you bring your offering to Him. In this Old Testament era, you do that by going to this physical hill, climbing it, going to these physical people wearing funny clothing, and going into, well, they do on your behalf, into this physical building, and they offer this physical animal. And through that long and meandering process, all of which is inspired, all of which is authoritative in the Old Testament, by that long meandering process, you, Israelite, would go and you'd worship God. Meanwhile, 600 miles away in Mount Gerizim, they have their own system of doing it. It's basically like the Mirror Universe version of it, so it's very similar. They go up their mountain, they go to their people, they go to their special building, they offer their special animal, and they worship the same God, Jehovah. And they just stand on each other's hilltops, barking at each other about whose hilltop is right. And Jesus says, none of you are even approaching God anymore. You're approaching buildings, you're approaching priests, you're bringing animals, but you people, you Jews over here, you have truth, but no spirit. You are offering God the things, but not offering God yourself. You Samaritans over here, you have such a zeal, you have such a fervor, you have such a devout following to the words of Moses, but you haven't got the rest of it. You've lost all the rest of it. You have that fervency, you have a spirit, but you've lost the truth. You've lost what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to do it. As Jesus flat out told her in the previous verse, you worship what you know, not what. You're not doing it right. How you're doing it is swell, but what you're doing is very, very wrong. But the day will come when this fault will not matter. And the day will come when that fault will not matter. The day will come when true worshipers will come to the Father and they will just approach God. Where? In spirit. They will approach God because God is everywhere. And so you can worship Him everywhere. The great, gigantic limitation of the Old Testament system was God is everywhere, but you can only worship Him over there. Well, that's done away with. Now you can worship God in spirit. You can say to God, I can't go to Jerusalem, Lord, but I'll be with you in spirit. I'll see you in spirit. And God will say, you can't go to Jerusalem. Plane tickets, expensive. Violence everywhere. Bombs going off all over the place. You can't go to Jerusalem, but you can be with me, and I'll be with you in spirit. He'll turn it around about God in just a second in 24, but here it's about us. We worship the Father in spirit and in truth. It's so much deeper than the right attitude, the right doctrine. That is the surface level of it. I'm not saying that's not there, but it's so much deeper than that. It's you worship God in spirit. You worship God in a spiritual way and not in a physical, go to that location because that's where the worship is done. It can be done anywhere, is the point. 24. God is a spirit, my Bible says. God is spiritual in nature. God is not constrained to a building. God is not reduced to a location. God is a king who doesn't have to sit on a physical throne of gold and with a oh, come on, and a ruby-colored train. These bells are always so short. God is a spiritual being, and so they that worship Him must worship Him in a spiritual nature and in truth. So there is a way that is right to worship God in a spiritual way. 25. The woman said to him, I know Messiah is coming. How does she know that? Because Moses told her so. Deuteronomy 18:30. I know the Messiah is coming, who is called the Christ, the anointed one, the specially chosen one of God. When he has come, he'll make all this clear. I know he'll make all this make sense. All that you're talking about, all that we think, our disagreements with the Jews over there and their disagreements with us, I know the Messiah will come and straighten all this out. Shame on the Jews, by the way, for shunning these people who follow the same Jehovah as them. They just weren't doing it right. Instead of teaching them how to do it, they just said, let's just ignore them, pretend they're not there. No wonder Jesus went to them. These people were looking for the Messiah. So Jesus said to her, I that speak to you am the Messiah. You will find some people, biblically ignorant people, or maybe they're not, but they're hoping that you are when they say this. They say, nowhere does Jesus ever flat out say he's the Messiah. And that's just kind of, we put that on him, and we just presume that about him. But he really was just some guy. This is Jesus Christ Superstar, that blasphemous play. That he was just some random guy who just kind of stumbled backward into fulfilling prophecies. That he wasn't really the Messiah. He didn't really have God working through him. He just accidentally fulfilled the prophecies, and so people just assumed he was the Messiah. Like, how do you accidentally figure out how to be born of a virgin? I don't know, but he figured it out apparently. That's just what they say. He's just some accidental Messiah. No. He flat out says, I am the Messiah. Who you're looking for, you found. Here I am in the flesh, right here, the Son of God divine. 27. Around this time, come the disciples after they made their Walmart trip. And they are shocked that he sees Jesus talking with this woman. Now, no one's going to go to him and say, what are you doing? What do you need from her that you can't get from us? No one's going to go to him and say, why are you talking to this person? This is what, probably, we told you. This is why we should take the long way around, because I knew we ended up talking to these people. That's all what's going on there. 28. They're over there. Jesus is here. The woman leaves her water pot and goes her way into the city and says to all the men there, come see a man who told me all the things that I ever did. She goes back to that. That's why Jesus said that. He blew her mind. He got her to think, you're something special and different. Even if that makes her want to change the subject, all she did was change the subject to him being the Messiah. That's how they got there. So she goes back to what initially blew her mind. This guy told me all the things that I ever did. I'm sure there was more to her life than having 5 husbands, but that's what's on her mind right now. Here, he told me all the things I ever did. Could this not be the Christ? Isn't this the Messiah? She doesn't say it very definitively. She asks it rhetorically, which is fine. And I don't think there's anything to that. I think maybe she just doesn't want to just, be all out there and say it. She wants them to experience it and make sure she's not crazy. But she says what she says. Isn't this the Messiah? Couldn't this be the Christ? So they all go out of the city and they come to him. Notice they don't say, no, you're crazy. They don't say, get out of here, you dumb woman. We have our religion. We don't want to throw away that whole thing that we have for a long time, that old system. We don't want to upset our apple cart. We have our established order. They don't do any of the things that the Jews of Judea do when the Messiah subject comes up. Spirit, but not truth. In the meanwhile, his disciples, my Bible says, prayed him. That's not to make a petition to God, proskunuo. This is just to ask a question. They asked a question saying, Master, eat, or make a request. Master, eat. Here, we brought you the food. We came all this way, at least eat. And Jesus says, I'm not hungry. After all that. That's why we're in here. That's why we came to Samaria. We did not want to come here. But what Jesus says here is, I have food that you don't know. He doesn't take the sandwich. He doesn't eat the food. He just says, I have food that you don't know. I have a different kind of food, a different kind of sustenance, a different kind of satisfaction that comes from it. I have something you don't know. 33. So they start talking amongst themselves. Did anyone bring him food? Did someone else bring him food? They're so human. They're just so real. They start asking us, did somebody bring him food and we went in there for nothing? Is that what's going on right now? They have no idea what's going on. Jesus says, my food is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. This conversation with this woman, that he can maybe hear the echoing of her saying, I just found the Messiah. He hears that echoing over there. And he just listens to it. And he hears the stir and the hubbub of all that happening over there. They're about to come storming up to meet him. And he hears all that. If you've ever talked with someone about Christ, or if you've ever done a devotional, if you've ever done a sermon, or if you've ever done anything where you have all this Bible stuff that you've learned and you just release it, when it's over, yes, you're very tired, but you feel so exhilarated. You feel very satisfied. Jesus says, this is better than a 5-course meal, what I've just gone through here. This is what my food is, to do the will of the Father, to have this conversation with her, to blow her mind, to see her excited eyes run out of town, or rather into town, to tell everybody I found the Messiah. That does me better than 100 cheeseburgers ever could do. To that he says, so do not say, like people, like farmers do, there's still 4 months to go, then the harvest. No, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look to the field. They are white already to be harvested. A farmer, a well-trained farmer, can look out and just by looking at his crops know how close it is time to cut the crop down. Look and see, it's time for harvesting people, souls. Verse 36, he that reaps receives wages.
Matthew,
Shoot.
I had an instructor at Harding.
So rude, isn't it? They got a camera right there, they're watching.
I had an instructor at Harding that visualized this. The town's up, the well's down, there's fields that's been planted, not yet ready for harvesting. They were coming out of the city to see them in their white garments and was walking literally through the fields.
Yeah.
And he says, look.
Hey, that's a pretty beautiful word picture. That's really great. I like that a lot. Okay, well, we'll pick it up right there with that beautiful word picture in 436. Thanks, everybody.